Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an investment firm with over 20 years' experience, now expanding its offering to a wider pool of investors.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, ELTIF, that provides access to real estate investment through a regulated and professionally managed fund. Open is designed for long-term stability, and unlike many investment vehicles typically restricted to professional investors, they are available to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investment requirements, making them more accessible than ever. To learn more, visit greenmanopen.com.
Before making any investments, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Hello and welcome to this latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
Okay, we've lots of things to get through, so we're going to start with housing before we get to things like Ukraine and the Peter McVerry Trust and the Arts Council debacle.
Just before we do it, today is the 14th of February. I remember it because my sister was born, my younger sister was born this day, and she's called Valentine. And did you ever see such claptrap? Has the country gone mad? Like, they talk about the cost of living and the cost of chocolates and flowers and eating out and so on. Sorry, newsflash, you don't have to do this. I mean, I'm going to be married 40 years. You only get 8 years for murder in this country. The fact of the matter is that, like, why do people have to inflict these unnecessary costs? So I assume you're staying in for the weekend.
Sorry, when you mentioned about that you only get 8 weeks for murder, I presume you mean
8 years.
8 years, sorry, that's Deirdre that you feel sorry for, that she's had to live 5 life sentences with you, is it?
Well, what I'm saying is this. I mean, like, this is the height of superficiality. On the 15th of February, I would try and love my wife as much as I would the 14th. This unnecessary Hallmark Day, Interflora Day. Would the country get a grip, please? Okay,
somebody said to me about this last night, or admonished me and said, and do you get your wife flowers on any of the other 364 days of the year? Do you?
No, I'll put it like this. Unless there was a funeral or a wedding or something on that they were necessary. No, there's no need for flowers. Like, there's daffodils grow outside and there's snowdrops, and you don't, like, flowers are quite expensive. Anyway, I just wanted to digress on that because people bitch and complain how they're broken, they've money. A lot of their spending they have.
Did you get in trouble this morning before you left, coming the train from Wexford, in that you had done nothing?
No, sorry. We actually had an agreement how stupid it was, the people feeling the necessity to respond to the commercialisation of a particular day of the year. Get over it.
Okay, can we talk about politics?
Yes.
Given that Cupid is not in the air in the studio anyway. The housing initiatives that Micheál Martin seems to be dreaming up. A couple of things in relation to this. I think there's a very clear sign now that, as you had highlighted a while back, he is the Minister for Housing. I mean, James Brown may be in the position, but he's essentially a super junior running a department that Micheál Martin is going to be completely on top of. And there's very good reason for that. In that, if the government goes into the next election, and governments always look to the next election, even if they're 5 years away, and goes in unable to have built the 300,000 homes promised, then it is kaput. It is done for. And Fine Gael, it could be existential for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, given where they're at, given that there will be a younger generation of people, 20s, 30s and 40s, who will be so angry about the size of the rents that they're having to pay or their inability to be able to buy a house. This is crucial for the government. So we had Micheál Martin. He made a speech, I'm told, at Cork Chamber of Commerce dinner last week, in which he really nailed this, and then went on RTÉ Radio on Sunday on the This Week programme and raised a few hairs. One of them being the idea of tax breaks for developers to encourage them to get back into the game, to start building more houses and apartments. And this has raised ructions with the opposition, and I think some concerns even within government as well, particularly when you see the OECD report that came out this week and said, amongst other things, that tax breaks for renters and for first-time buyers and for landlords hasn't actually helped with the supply and has only put prices up. So is it madness to actually think that tax breaks for developers will provide any benefit, and will it give any would it also provide comfort to the opposition for attacking the government on the basis, look at you, you're only interested in protecting the wealthy? So I have lots of other things to say about that, but where do you think we're going with Micheál Martin?
Well, first of all, I happened to be going for my Riverside walk on Sunday, and I heard, just flicked on to the This Week radio programme on RTE1 and listened to the entire interview. I thought the most newsworthy thing he said was that there would be no cost of living package in this year's budget or whatever. And given, electricity credits and double social welfare payments and child benefit payments came to about $5 billion, I thought that was a significant statement that he eliminated expectations on that. I heard.
There are 400,000 people who are actually still in arrears on their gas and electricity bills. If they're in arrears now, what are they going to be like come next winter?
Fair point. So I listened to his points on housing. I actually found this week very, very depressing from the housing point of view. My reference point is this. I chaired a conference on the 26th of November, and it was right at the peak political time. The 29th was polling day. And so, I listened attentively. Peter Horgan of Grayling Properties, Lugas Capital, Alan Merriman, CEO of Elkstone, Paddy McGilligan of Activate Capital, Head of Investment, which is a subsidiary of ISIF, which is the government's own strategic investment fund, Claire Solon of Greystar. And they were at pains over hours to explain the problem of the lack of stability. And I see Alan English is retiring. I really feel...
Sorry, he's editor of the Sunday Independent.
Yes, in April. The point I'm making is the collective editors of all the print media and Kevin Backhurst as chief editor of Irish the RTE. This debate that we had this week about rent controls investment should have happened during the election. And no one said, in very simple terms, if it's going to be $24 billion a year on housing, where is the non-state money going to come from? Because that's going to max out at $6 billion. It's a very simple question, and no one is providing an answer to that. We have all sorts of smoke and mirrors, all sorts of condemnation. What the programme for government actually says as regards this, and I quote, achieve stable and predictable policy to attract and retain private investment, combined with record state levels of investment to finance $24 billion per annum needed to build 60,000 homes annually by 2030, unquote. So that's whatever you're having yourself. And he was obviously trying to build upon that and so on. And I fully accept, the figures that were published last October. The cost of living in Dublin, the average rent is $2,634 per month out of after-tax income.
Yeah, average.
So it's the second most expensive city in Europe over and above London. And so all of this, in my view, is to raise the question, is there the political will to face down objectors in the planning system? Is there the political will to provide the stable conditions for investment? And, the answer to that is, because I thought Micheál was starting to row back. Simon Harris came out and said, so even the most tentative steps in this direction have been hit on the head this week really hard. Simon Harris said, well, it's very clear, Fine Gael will be on the side of renters and, the programme for government. So, look, the fact of the matter is that there is no plan to get this money in.
This needs a radical reset. This needs to be... Do you remember the way when Enda Kenny and Eamon Gilmore came into power in 2011, they just made it jobs. It was all about as many jobs as possible could be got. And there was good reason, because jobs provide tax revenues, and also people in jobs are not claiming social welfare, and it also gives people a purpose. This is as important. The government needs a whole-of-government approach in relation to housing. but it needs to be radical in relation to how it actually does it. It can't be just tinkering around the edges in relation to, well, we might do this in rent controls, and then backing off the minute it gets a little bit. It can't be saying, well, we want more private money, and then when the people start kicking up, vultures, you're only trying to reward vultures. Look, we're going to need, the OECD report said the government's desire to have 50,000 homes a year is not enough. Davy came out and said 93,000, like a massive number. But we have built 90,000 a year before. But we need to get to those numbers. To get to those numbers, we have to do enormous amount of things in relation to planning, but we also have to do an enormous amount of things in relation to finance. So we've got to look at things. We've got to look at things like really dramatic things, such as, do we remove VAT on all building products? Is that how the government invests money? It takes the hit on the VAT on everything in relation to construction, just as one idea, one example. But when it comes to finance, it's going to have to get private finance in. There is no way you can spend 30 to 40 billion euro per annum out of state funds. It just simply isn't possible. It can't be done. And the opposition parties sort of pay lip service to the idea, there's a role for private money, Do you know what? They haven't actually a clear plan as to how they would involve private money, and private money looks for return. That's the reality of it. But I'll tell you something else where I was disappointed in this week. I had Pascal Donoghue on The Last Word on Thursday to talk about this OECD report on housing. And one of the things he was very much emphasising is that he wanted foreign capital, foreign private capital, foreign investors, foreign pension funds. And I said, well, what about the Irish ones? And I pointed out to him something we've brought up on this podcast previously, that there's about 170 billion euro sitting on deposit in the banks. And I was actually quite taken aback by how defensive he was about the idea, those are savings that have to be protected. People don't want to be risking their money. And I'm going, Jesus Christ, we have a crisis. We have an absolute crisis in relation to housing. There has to be a way that we can encourage some of that money. I'm not talking about all the 170 million on deposit, but at least 10, 20, 30 billion of that could be put into a different type of fund which can then be leveraged off. And I said it to you last week, like the way it's done in France, there are ways of doing these things, and imagination is required and a bit of balls. They're going to actually have to show a bit of, and they have to do it now. Because if they don't do it in their first year of a 5-year term, they'll never do it. And if they don't do it, well, they'll get what's coming to them in the next general election.
So just to add to that, I agree with all that. First of all, there's a lot of misinformation here. First of all, the rent cap is not 2%. It's 2% or the rate of inflation. So if inflation, the CPI, is 0.7%, the cap is 0.7%. So that's the first point. So actually your maintenance charge could go up, you know what I mean? The bill that's part of the tenancy, and you're into a loss-making situation.
So that's for the landlord.
That's right. That's right. Or for these funds who are operating this. Secondly, there's never been as many tenancies. Well, let's just look at the facts here. So you go to the RTB, and in 2022 there were 246,000 tenancies, which in itself was more than 250,000 in 2021. So in the middle of last year, it was 230. So there isn't more tenancies, and there's figures on landlords as well. I'll tell you how many houses are going to be built this year. About 36,500. That's from the people who know what's happening.
Which is about half of what we really need.
So the key element we're talking about is a thing called PRS, the private rented sector. So Davies estimated that 170,000 of these apartments need to be built under the PRS scheme of those companies I alluded to earlier. And the difference for 2024 outturn is apartments were down 9,000. So these people are actually leaving the market. Now, the first thing that needs to be said is their business model is very low stable interest rates and rising rents. Rents are frozen and interest rates, as you know, have been higher than they were in the previous 2 decades. So the fact of the matter is that if you want to attract this investment, and there is absolutely... I was looking at that Livret A scheme in France. The issue here is very simple, and you put your finger on it, is that yes, the banks and depositors could divert up to 30 grand a person into a fund for social and affordable housing, but only on the basis that the state would underwrite it. Whereas Michael O'Flynn and others take risks. They can lose money or make money. So the fact of the matter is that state guarantee is not going to be forthcoming. And just to tell you the reality on the ground, speaking of Pascal and the Department of Finance, as we speak, there are cost rental schemes and CALF schemes, right, which are ready to go. The approved housing body has reached agreement with the developer. We're good to build, and they can't get finance approval. And that same Department of Finance doesn't give a tuppenny damn about the delays involved. And I reckon there's about 2,500 units held up in that. And here's the same old thing. No one will be putting down a PQ to the Minister of Finance about this. They'll be putting it down to the Minister for Housing, who actually has to say no to people. And since January, they haven't approved one, I'm told. And it's just lying there ready to go.
Why it needs a whole of government approach.
Absolutely.
And why this needs to be regarded as an emergency. And by the way, just in case anyone doesn't realise it or wants to misrepresent what I've said, although I believe that we need private funding, I also do believe greatly in the role of the state. But actually, Ireland, I think, has the second highest, possibly even the highest, state expenditure on housing proportionately in the EU at present. We are pumping money into it. The problem is we don't have enough private money to go alongside it. And this is what we actually have to encourage. But this is, I think, going to be the dominant political story for some time to come. And if the government... It has to shake off the shackles of conservatism. It has got to be radical. And it's got to be radical in a way that gets as many people involved as possible.
But my point is this, that I actually think... like I always ask myself, is things getting better or things getting worse? And I'm actually, as regards housing delivery, and I'm actually coming to the conclusion that when you actually boil it all down, Owen Bryn had a case, an anecdote, it's a valid point, a constituent whose rent is at 1,450, we'll just say, per month. And that if rent controls go, they'll have to pay 2,500, right? Yeah. And let's be clear, what is meant in the Housing Commission by reference rents is that the cap will apply to the tenant and not to the property. And it'll apply to the area. In other words, that if the tenant moves out, gets their own ownership of home or whatever, then you don't have the cap applicable. So the rock
to that particular property for a new person coming in.
You start again, and you go for really market rents at that time. But you do afford a protection to the individual.
We see the problem, it would appear, was that if you do get rid of the rent controls or the rent pressure zones or whatever, you make changes, in the absence of new accommodation being available this year, next year, or the few years to come, an awful lot of people are going to get screwed in the interim before the new properties become available, aren't they?
And I'm told one of the things, you remember when the eviction ban was taken away, they came up with a tenant in situ scheme.
Yeah.
I hear the finance has made that completely inoperable. It hasn't worked. They just won't, And sorry, what they're saying with their point where they're not approving these cost rental schemes is, just lads, now, what's this going to cost us? Because if the rent is at an affordable level or the mortgage is at an affordable level, we're on the tab for the rest. The other thing I want to say is the big lie here, and I actually think this needs to be admitted. The general theory is if we increase the supply, the cost of homes will come down. Big surprise here. It's like BMW cars or Mercedes cars. The price, the list price in 25, 26, 27, 28, the price of housing, new housing, is not going to come down under any circumstance. Even if you built 70,000 a year, it's not going to come down because the actual cost of building a detached 3-bedroom bungalow in Bohola is 354,000. The cost of, with site costs in Dublin, it's 600,000. That ain't going to come down, Matt. There is no panacea here.
But then, that is a good reason to say that there is safety in having a state bond situation. Yes. Because if people say, I'm not risking moving 30 or 50,000 of my savings out of my state-guaranteed bank account into this risky product, it's actually very low risk, if any risk at all, because as you've just said, the prices of the properties in which they'll invest will not fall.
One other thing that caught my eye, which I thought was really innovative and worthy of support, was the Hardware Association did a study on derelict and empty houses. We discussed this about Over the Shop. So they said there's 167,000 empty homes, right, that can be done up. And they said if you strip away those that are gone, so at the moment, there's a 50 grand grant for doing up a vacant home and 20 grand extra for a derelict home. And you can maybe get an SEA insulation grant or whatever. There were 10,000 application forms for this. And basically, in rural towns, the cost of building a bungalow is 350,000. You won't get that for it. You know what I mean? So the reality is, this is really affordable. And I think... you would be familiar with this from your business coverage. Section 23 relief, which built all these hotels that weren't wanted, 47 of them ending up in Nama. That I think a very simple, quick fix solution is to earmark provincial towns, not the ones that are going well, the ones that need, and just say within those urban areas, if anyone has a derelict property, the Section 23 relief is in year one, when your rent is low, you can, or when you don't have rent, you can offset your loss against other rent that you have. This has proven success. So I actually think, so these guys were looking to meet the Hardware Association with James Brown. There's and so the figure is 40,000 units could be put in place there.
Well, actually...
And no planning required.
You've actually put into mind now, I met a friend of yours during the week.
There is one.
Yeah,
the friend.
Pat Farrell.
Yes.
Pat Farrell, who had a very career, former secretary of Fianna Fáil, back in the time when you were the government minister, that far back, worked in the Building Society.
An Albert guy back in the day, yeah.
Well, he actually started in Charlie Haughey's time, funnily enough.
He doesn't put that so much on his CV now.
Well, I brought it up because it's one of my magnified podcast interviews. Yeah. He's the current edition of it. And we were talking about his role with the investment institutions for property. And one of the things he brought up, which was interesting, was in relation to Section 23, that initially it actually worked quite well because it had a specific limited target, very much in rebuilding inner city Dublin and other parts. And the problem was then, because of political pressure from rural TDs, it was extended into all parts of the country. And I'm not now saying what he said. I'm bringing this up myself. I mean, I do remember making an RT documentary back in 2004 and visiting a place down in Leitrim called Kesh Carrigan, which basically was the
arsehole of nowhere.
A housing estate that came out of nowhere in a tiny village and suddenly overwhelmed it. Yeah. And there was tumbleweed blowing through it. But it had all been
These were the ghost estates.
All built on the basis of tax incentives.
Probably alluded to in your great book.
The first one was actually who really runs Ireland. Anyway, the point still being that the tax stakes were brought to the wrong places. And the other thing you could argue against the Section 23 from that era, that we got a lot of bad building in Dublin. We got
quality,
but that shouldn't be a problem now in the same respect, because of the fact that we now have much better building regulations and standards, which of course has put the prices up. So anyway, that was just something I discussed with Pat Farrell. We need to take a break.
Pat represents the 17 institutional investors, your Blackstones, your Kennedy Wilsons, your Heinzes and so on. And he actually, and I see he was derided by Owen O'Brien in the Dáil as a mouthpiece for lobbyists just looking for more grants and more tax subsidies. Look, Owen, the truth is, his people are the people who are going to put the hard hats on and build the houses, and would have built them in Clonliffe and Dundrum if they were let. My point is this. The summation of the week for me on housing is there's a real question mark beyond political footballs, populist stuff about tenancies and all that, and planning. There is no political will to resolve this problem at a deep level.
Okay, we want to talk about the Peter McVerry Trust, the Arts Council debacle and Ukraine when we come back after this break.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland.
Learn more at greenmanopen.com. Before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down. A past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back to Paths to Power. Let's briefly talk about the Peter McVerry Trust. You wanted to bring that up today because there's been a lot of reports about governance at the Peter McVerry Trust. There have been resignations of the chair, and other directors are departing and are not coming back. It's clear as well now that there is land owned by the Peter McVerry Trust that was due to be turned into sheltered housing, and the finance is not there to actually do it. I have a few points I want to make in relation to this, but where are you on this?
I've one central point. In October 23, an investigation was done by the regulatory authority for approved housing bodies. So that's not only the Peter McVerry Trust, that would be Simon, Respond, Clúid, all of those different, who are now the largest landowners and landlords in the country. And they have supplanted local authorities who have been sitting on their hands as regards social housing and affordable housing. Sorry, where is the content of this? The charities regulator has done a report, and I'm just not. I'm hearing, all this stuff. Please publish. Please give us full accountability. We've had a situation that Pat Doyle was there for 19 years. I've actually chaired fundraising events where significant six-figure sums were raised for, private
for Peter McVerry
luncheons
Trust
and things like that.
So have I was going to bring that up.
And so the question is, there is absolutely. So I see Father Peter McVerry himself has resigned as secretary and off the board.
Well, I think he's still on the board, isn't he?
Is he? Put it like this: he's resigned as secretary. Francis Doherty was put in to replace Pat Doyle, and he's resigned. 2 other members of the board resigned. Please, Mr. Government, this is public money. This is private donations, charitable money, which is equivalent to public money. Please publish. Tell us what's the story, and do we need to basically assimilate the Peter McVerry Trust into one of the other AHBs? But it seems like everyone is saying, has raised the question, but nobody's come up with the specifics.
Okay, as it happens, you just reminded me that a number of my Valentine Day or nights, weekends, have been in the service of the Peter McVerry Trust hosting their annual Valentine's Night Ball, which used to take place in Clontarf Castle. And the last one that I did would have been February 2023, and it actually turned into something of a going away night for Pat Doyle as chief executive. Yeah. And I'm not aware if they had one last year. I don't know if they've had one this year. If they have, I wasn't asked to actually chair it or to host the night's events. I wonder, would it have been very difficult for them to have these sort of fundraising events, given all of the publicity that there actually has been? But I remember talking to, and one of the reasons I got involved and did this over a number of years was finding out just how much money the Peter McVerry Trust had to raise from charitable donations each year. It was from, when I started, it was around 12 million. It's gone up to about 15 million. Out of an overall budget, I think, of about 36 million. The balance coming from the state. And here's the interesting thing, the other dilemma. When you look at it, and you look at bodies like the Peter McVerry Trust, they effectively do the job of the state on the cheap for the state. Okay, so
this will be homeless shelters,
shelters and
hostels and things
like that.
Other than the provision of social housing,
and then the provision of housing for people
which
who
is
otherwise wouldn't get.
100% state funded normally. Like if a local authority builds a council house, social, they will get 100% compensated by the state.
Yeah, but it all sort of goes into a pot, and the Peter McVerry does a range of things and expanded beyond Dublin as well in doing this. And it raises the bigger question of whether the state outsources its responsibility and takes advantage of the charitable nature of many people who are prepared to dig deep and spend on things that you could argue that the state should do. Now, on the other hand, there's actually an enormous amount of benefit to people to get involved in doing charitable work, and they actually feel better themselves. You know, there's psychological studies which show that people who help out in charities feel better themselves because they are helping others. And I wouldn't say that, I don't believe that if you were to put the state in charge of everything, that it would work better. God knows, we've seen plenty of examples of where it doesn't work better. But it does raise interesting questions about where the balance should lie and where things should. And then if the state... I mean, but the problem is the state effectively now is filling the holes in the finances of Peter McVerry Trust after this debacle. I suspect his charitable donations may have fallen somewhat. So that means the state has to put more money in. But the state cannot afford the Peter McVerry Trust to fail.
But the taxpayers paying for all of these regulatory authorities and the charities regulator. Like, we're entitled to get the full publication
I'm
of
not
this.
denying that.
And that is... Now, can I get on to Ukraine? Because I think this is the story of the week.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the phone call between Putin and Trump.
Oh, sorry, can I actually just 1 second briefly?
Yeah, that's okay.
Peter McVerry himself said to me 3 years ago when we were doing the ball on February 2022, and it was just after the time the Russians had invaded and we were starting to bring in the Ukrainians, and he was predicting to me the problems that this would actually cause as to we have to house them, but where are we going to house them? What are the knock-on effects and all the rest of it? So, he's not a man who lives in an ivory tower, far from it. He's a man who knows very much how things work at the cold face
absolutely.
In relation to poverty and addiction.
That isn't in dispute, actually, and he's dedicated his adult life to that,
absolutely.
and I accept that. But these are public monies, and we need proper answers.
Okay, well, talk to me about Putin and Donald Trump.
Okay,
yeah.
What I want to say is this, that the sort of chorus has been that, before we ever get into any negotiations, he's given away Crimea and all the Russians' invasion up to 2014. He's ruled out Ukraine being allowed to be a member of NATO and all that involves in terms of mutual protections, and that basically, that Trump is a disgrace and so on. So first point I want to make is that there was a guy, and because I'm writing this book about the game of life, and I wrote out to people. Some people haven't replied to me, like Matt Cooper, but other people.
I'm busy. I went this time, and actually, lots of other people that you've written to have been getting on to me. Jesus, have you got this letter from Ivan? But anyway,
one of them came back to me. One of the things, this is a guy who was a partner in KPMG. He's now finished his career. He's almost 70, and he's one of the sharpest brains I know. And he said one of the things that served him really well in life in assessing public policy and situations was a guy called Herb Steen. In the 1970s, he was an economist in the Richard Nixon regime. And Steen's law is, and I quote, "If something can't go on forever, it will stop." And that, I think, Steen's law is very apt when it comes to Ukraine. So, it can't go on forever. There is not going to be a Ukrainian victory. There's not going to be a Russian victory. The death toll will continue to rise. The energy crisis will continue to exacerbate. I reckon oil and gas prices could reduce by 20% if there was peace in Ukraine. But the real point I want to make, Matt, is this, that we have skin in this game. On the 9th of January this year, there were 85,000 Ukrainians who were beneficiaries of temporary provision, BOTPs. Now, 20,000 of those are kids at school, 13,000 of them are over 55, 23,000 are at work. But it falls into two categories. One is the accommodation recognition payment, which is the $800 per month, which is tax-free. And there's about 35,000 of the 65,000 there. And there's 30,000 in hotels and hostels and accommodation, which is, we call it the commercial side. All those contracts end on the 31st of March 2025. The government stated in March 2024 that these provisions and the social welfare provisions of beneficiaries of term will end, right? So we are now facing a situation that, as we speak, each week, lots are being taken out as the leases come to an end. So the fact of the matter is, we need peace in Ukraine ASAP to actually send 60,000 Ukrainians back. That's what we need to do. And you know what? In one fell swoop, you solve the homeless problem of 14,000 people. You'd be able to offer them accommodation somewhere in the country most suitable to them. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. This is not like Macron coming out and saying, Ukraine has got to be central to this and so on. I'm sorry, but in this case, and I totally get that there has to be a security zone, there has to be security guarantees, that this can't flare. There maybe has to be international peacekeeping force on the border, wherever the drawing of the border after Russia get back the Donbass. But what I'm trying to say to you is this. any rational, logical person looking at this, looking at the Irish situation, would have to say, we want this to proceed.
Okay, just a couple of things in relation to that. First of all, I think you look at what Trump did unilaterally without his NATO colleagues, and more importantly, without the prior approval of the Ukrainians, given it is their country. I mean, can you imagine that if it had been decided to do a peace settlement for Ireland in the north without any reference to people living in the north or people living in the rest of Ireland, that the Americans and the British just decided for us? I don't think we'd be particularly happy. So you can understand exactly why the Ukrainians are livid, and they're rightly to be, about the way Trump has behaved. Trump loves to portray himself, the art of the deal. The art of the crap deal, usually. Remember, this is a guy who had 4 corporate bankruptcies. And you don't go into talks about talks and before the actual talks start, give away 2 of the major bargaining positions that you have, one being possible Ukraine involvement in NATO and the other being conceding that previously stolen lands would remain in Russian hands. So that just shows you what a poor negotiator he actually is. And you're also, I think, making an assumption that I don't think will necessarily hold true, is that a deal will be struck and that a deal will hold. So that is an issue. I think that it'll be interesting to see if the Ukrainian people here decide that they want to go home, that it'll be safe for them to go home. It'll be interesting to see how many have settled here now in Ireland on the basis that the children have settled in schools, are learning the language. They might find it just a safer and better place. And who knows, maybe for a lot of these families, you have women and children that if their husbands have been fighting in Ukraine or if have been maintaining the economy, they might decide they want to come. God knows, there might even be a few builders amongst them who could actually help out over here. But it's, I don't like the idea that we suddenly have this cut-off point of March 2025 on the basis that, we offered our hospitality, and if we wanted to be good hosts, you don't suddenly decide to kick out the people that you've invited into the country. But politically, realistically, I don't see the opposition parties jumping up and down either, do you, to stop the government doing that?
Well, you can't run your life by what the opposition are going to jump up and down, because they will jump up and down. Look...
Well, do you think they'll jump up and down? Because I think they want to be seen that... they want to reduce the numbers of Ukrainians in Ireland as well. Sinn Féin were the first ones to start talking about this March 31st
look, that's
deadline.
what oppositions do, jump up and down, so that's fine. Look, I get all your principled position and I get all your tut-tutting about Trump, but the truth of it is you have 2 choices. Do you continue doing the same thing and expect a different outcome, or do you try something new? And of course, there's going to be accusations that people were sold out. But we've now reached a stage that this has been fought to a standstill. And if anything, in fairness to the Americans, they put $300 billion into fighting Russia in Ukraine. That just can't go on. And, under Steen's law, that means it must stop. So that's the first point. The second point is there'll definitely be no deal, even a bad deal, or no peace, unless someone, takes up the position. And I don't see Macron or Schultz or anyone in Europe actually trying to broker any settlement. They actually aren't in that headspace. And so therefore...
But, a settlement does involve rewarding Russian aggression. I mean, basically what you're saying is, well, Russia has stolen the land of Ukraine. 20% of the land of Ukraine has killed countless numbers of Ukrainian people and many of its own people in this unjust and uncalled for war. And now you're saying as well, we might as well just let them off with it. And does that not then also encourage Putin, if not immediately in the short term, but in the medium term, that he looks at Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, other places like that,
Russia has
he
inflation.
wants a greater Russia.
Russia has inflation of 21%. The sanctions are starting to bite. The fact of the matter is that there's about 35 million people that are in Kyiv and in the other western parts of Ukraine. They have to look at rebuilding their country, and it's going to be a huge reconstruction effort. And to be honest with you, if I felt there was any chance Ukraine could win this war, I think that, but it started, the tanks rolled in on the 24th of February 2022. You've had 3 years of trying to go with that theory, and I'm saying, you know what, we've got to face reality here. Ukraine isn't going to get that territory back. I'm sorry.
But just as an aside, why do you think it is that there's so much less opposition to what Russia does in Ukraine amongst many people in this country as to what Israel does in Gaza? Well, actually, maybe we won't go
sorry,
there.
what I want to say is this. The Middle East, Ireland does not have significant skin in the game.
And we do in
this issue, in terms of energy prices, absolutely we have huge, as I say, 20% reduction in oil and gas prices. And secondly, in terms, let's be clear, on the Department of Children that had responsibility for migration, their budget went from 2021, 1.6 billion to 8 billion. This is costing us a fortune. It's not sustainable, Matt. And someone has to call this out and say, we're in favour of a peace deal.
Okay, one other thing for this edition of Path to Power that I want to discuss, and that's the Arts Council debacle. For those people who've been following it, yet more public money been wasted. The Arts Council investing 7 million quid in a new computer system, which his main job, I think, was to disperse grants by the Arts Council. And it has been a complete disaster. It has been abandoned. 5.6 million of the expenditure cannot be recovered. It's gone forever. But if they'd continued on the track they were on, it would have cost, I think, an extra 9 million. Now, the politics of this are fascinating as well, because the Arts Council people, there was a briefing given to the Irish Daily Mail Friday morning pointing out that they didn't hide this, that they kept alerting the Department of Arts as to what was actually going on, that their accounts had been signed off by the Comptroller and Auditor General over the last few years because it was there in it. And you have Patrick O'Donovan, the new minister, bringing it to Cabinet this week, and they're going, oh, this is dreadful, this is terrible. And then quite clearly, the finger of blame has been pointed at the former minister, Catherine Martin, and the government is looking to dump all over the Greens, saying this wasn't brought to our attention, she should have brought it forward and all the rest of it. Some people are also pointing out that there is an irony in Patrick O'Donovan getting on his high horse in relation to all of this, given that he had been the minister responsible for the Office of Public Works, for debacles such as the bicycle shed and the wall outside the Workplace Relations Commission. So what do you reckon is going on?
Well, I have very good contact in the Arts Council, and I rang him and I said, what's the story here? So he said the story is that they administer at that time in 2016 about 120, is now 140 million of grants. And they received at that time previously about 3,500 applications. Could be Wexford Opera Festival, it could be a local theatre group or whatever, could be music, arts, different forms, performing arts. That's gone up to 7,000 applications. And the software system they had for processing that, being fit for purpose for GDPR, to actually ensure that all the stuff on the form was synchronized and that the system was transparent, it needed to be updated. So they signed a deal with this particular company around, I'd say in the late 20-teens. And what happened was they'd spent 4 million on it, and it wasn't working. Right? Just wasn't working. They got, I think, EY and others to come in and advise them what to do. And the board was presented with a decision around about 2022, which was, do you throw 2 million more after your 4, or do you just forget it and walk away? With the benefit of 3 years of hindsight, because the system has never worked properly, they would have been better to walk away. And to that extent, they're culpable. But at every hand's turn, and this is where I'm going with this, they notified the Department of Arts and Culture and all of that. So there was no question of them doing a solo run. There was no question, because as you know, the government have a whole apparatus of chief technology officer across all departments from the HSE for different software systems. So they had the benefit of all of that. The truth of the matter here is that what's egregious from the point of view of the department is that this was known in 2023. Catherine Martin did not alert the Cabinet to this, and I have accused her in relation to RTE and other matters of sleepwalking. Catherine Muppet Martin, I called her, and this is a classic example of where she was not fit for purpose on the job. But the real point I want to make here is that the former Secretary General was Catherine Licken. The present Secretary General is Fergal O'Cogley, and they changed about 18 months ago. The fact of the matter is, this department, both with RTE and this, and God knows, it's not like the Department of Justice, it's not like the Department of Housing or the Department of Finance, where they have a horrendous workload. This is a fairly small department. This department is, in my opinion, not fit for purpose, and it absolutely needs a radical shake-up. And you know, we wrote a cheque for 725 million to bail out RT for 3 years, which is simply kicking the can down the road. All of that, the Department of Arts have been asleep at the wheel, and this is a systems failure by that same department. Go figure.
Okay, there's a few things arise out of that. One is in relation to many people believe that we need a bigger state, a more expansive state. And in fact, we're getting there in some respects in that it was this week there were figures came out that we are going to have more than 400,000 public servants by the end of the year. I think the figure is going to be about 415,000.
Yeah, so the exact figure today is 393,410.
Yeah.
Which is an increase of a third on the level after the crash.
Exactly, and this is the point I was going to come to, because if you remember back, we were told at the time of the crash that we could never get ourselves into a situation again where our public services were costing us so much and that things were out of kilter. But what's actually happened since is that all of the pay rates have been restored in some, and the cost to the state has gone up to something like, in just pay alone, to about 33 billion. Now, look, I fully understand that the size of the population has increased considerably, that the numbers working in the public service is a fraction of those working in the private service, that we need all of these doctors and nurses and teachers and all the rest of it, and I fully think we need more of them. The problem is how many people do we have in administration or doing non-jobs to an extent across, or else doing their jobs really, really badly. And, you know, we see how much waste goes on in the public sector. And yet many of the people who condemn that seem to think that it's just down to the politicians rather than looking beneath it to the people who are actually responsible and holding them responsible as well for their failures or for the fact that they may be in positions which are not actually required.
So on the subscription episode, I want to go into detail on working from home. You know, the lousers in the Department of Social Protection are objecting to doing more than 1 day a week in work from home. And these career breaks, have you seen about 12-year career breaks? Like, that's all, we'll save it for the...
But I just want to finish the
point. Arts Council?
Well, sorry, I just want to... I mean, I'll tell you one thing. You know, there is this belief that the state is unable to put in these various things. And of course, this goes back to PPARS. Do you remember that? That was the payroll system for the health services. That cost 220 million quid before it was abandoned back in 2014. And that was a major scandal. E-voting, I think the machines cost about 70 million quid, all written off. But you know what? It happens in the private sector as well. The idea that it only happens in the public sector is a nonsense. What happens is you don't actually get to hear about it as much in the private sector, but people do get canned.
Do you think, like, the truth is, in the private sector, it's somebody's actual money. In the public sector, it's not your money. It's not their money.
Sorry, in the private sector, the point I was going to make is...
It's a bottomless leaking pit.
In the private sector, there are many times, and people are held responsible and they're fired and whatever, but...
Nobody's fired. in the private sector. The public sector, no one's fired.
But I just give you one example. I mean, Bank of Ireland has spent how much on trying to reform its IT systems? Well over £1 billion. And they're still...
And Revolut is still eating their lunch.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, you know, it happens in the private sector as well, where there's a failure to implement the upgrading of IT systems. This is not just...
So you're giving them a free pass?
No, I'm not. I'm actually providing a little bit more context and understanding, Ivan. But that said, I mean, the idea that a wall outside the Workplace Relations Commission would actually cost more than it would have cost to build a 4-bedroom house.
It's time to give Elon Musk a ring.
Well, yes and no, right here. And that's where you brought me to where I wanted to go, right? Because I'm sure you'd have all these Doge-style enthusiasts who will probably
Slash and burn.
Yeah, but you know one thing?
Even Dave McWilliams is coming around to that now.
Cultural Philistines like yourself would probably say, get rid of all the Arts Council grants, save 140 million
the poor
quid.
painters and that, I'm all for them getting a few bob, but I'm actually not in favour of the process of administering costing a fortune.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's in charge of it, but in favour of that. But the problem is what Musk is doing is that rather than actually reforming the way in which payments are made, or to say he's just getting rid of everything.
But he's making him come back to work.
Hold on, would you just let me finish the point a second? Cal Thomas was mobbing me during the week.
Yeah.
Cal, you like Cal.
The guy that you won't let a man speak his mind at all. There's some Marion or Mairead or someone.
Marion McKeown, you know
and
very
her
well who it
are
is.
two virtue signalling, anti-Trump, deranged people, and poor Cal can't get a word in edgeways.
He gets more than a word in. Anyway, the point is, Cal started from his column this week. He's actually America's most syndicated political columnist. He has an enormous fan club in the United States.
Whereas you just go to different publications, be it the Mail or the Business. You don't syndicate it because you maximise your revenue. Carry on, yeah.
You say, I don't let Cal speak. Anyway, the point I was getting to is that he started his column by using the analogy of a spring clean. That what Musk is doing is the idea that he said his mother got him into the habit when he was a child, and he's continued it into his adult life of going to his wardrobe every spring and taking out the clothes that he doesn't need and giving some to charity and throwing others away. And I said, that's great. I've no problem with that, Cal. The problem with what Musk is doing is he's going to the wardrobe and he's taking everything out and he's throwing everything out, right? And he's leaving himself with nothing. And that's exactly what is happening in America at the moment. And that is what we don't need in our public service. You can't throw everything out to get rid of the bad.
Are you seriously saying within the 33 billion this year, which is the public sector payroll cost, that there is maximum efficiency, there's no fraud,
Have
there's
you
no
been
waste?
listening to me?
No, I'm saying. You
wouldn't be asking me that question if you've been listening to me.
Your woolly thinking is actually look the other way. That's what you're actually saying.
No, you are proving that you didn't listen to me. I said that there's waste in administration. I believe there's lots of people doing jobs in the public service who are probably still filling out pen and paper things that could be done in our hospitals, for example. Why? And I've said this to you many times before. Why aren't all nurses and doctors carrying iPads around with them and inputting things electronically so that it can all be transferred? Medicines, the prescriptions and stuff, instead of filing cabinet after filing cabinet and stuff. I've been saying that for a long time. Of course, it's better. And artificial intelligence is going to create opportunities in the future as well, except I'd imagine governments will be scared to take on the potential of people having to lose their jobs to make way for that.
My last word on the Arts Council is that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a proper national kicking for Catherine Martin, and that the real culprit, the Department of Arts, which has got multiple failings and well-proven failings in terms of safeguarding taxpayers' interests, is going to get away scot-free, as always.
Okay, look, we leave it there. For the subscription edition, which will be available on Sunday, you have working from home in the public sector, which Ivan has just alluded to. Jim O'Callaghan is talking about flights, sending refugee asylum seekers, chartering flights to leave the country.
What's wrong with that?
No, Helen McEntee suggested it last year. It didn't happen. I wonder, will Jim O'Callaghan actually do it?
Martin Conway?
We will talk about Martin Conway. We will also talk about Brendan Griffin as a lobbyist. Owen Hayes, indefinitely suspended by the Social Democrats. I know you want to talk about decision-making in government. We'll get to Trump tariffs as well. And we've a few of your questions as well. So there's absolutely loads in the subscription edition as well, if you want to go there. So my thanks to both Aidan and Tom for production. From me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for being with us. Until the next time.